Obedience doesn't look like fear. Not at first. It looks like order, like cooperation, like someone doing what they're told without resistance, without question. You see it in classrooms, in offices, in prisons, in cults, in armies, in relationships that don't look abusive, but silence everyone inside. And somewhere along the way, you ask yourself the question people are afraid to hear out loud. How do you make a human being obey completely? Not just comply, but surrender. Let's talk about what it takes to break a mind. It starts with control of context. Humans don't make choices in a vacuum. We look around. We mirror others. We look for rules. And when the rules are clear, even if they're cruel, most people follow. The first step to creating total obedience is isolation. You remove the person from their normal world, from familiar people, from their schedule, from their sense of time and space. You disorient them, not violently, subtly. You remove clocks. You control light. You interrupt sleep. You control food, water, temperature. The goal is not torture. It's dependency. Because once someone can't rely on the world around them, they start looking inward. And when what they find inside is fear and confusion, they reach for the only stable voice in the room, the one telling them what to do. Let's talk about the erosion of self-trust. Most people don't follow orders blindly at first. They question. They hesitate. So you make them doubt their perception. This is called gaslighting. You say things like, "That didn't happen. You're overreacting. You misunderstood. You're imagining things." And over time, they begin to believe you. Because the brain wants consistency more than it wants truth. Once you control their interpretation of reality, you control their behavior. Let's talk about reward and punishment. Obedience thrives in environments of unpredictable reinforcement. You give praise, then withdraw it. You show kindness, then coldness. You grant privileges, then take them away without warning. This creates learned helplessness, a state where the person no longer knows what causes pain or what stops it. So they stop resisting altogether. They wait for instruction. They hope for mercy. They obey. Let's talk about language control. Words shape thought. When you limit vocabulary, you limit the ability to think critically. Totalitarian regimes do this. Cults do this. Abusers do this. They give new definitions to old words. Love means loyalty. Respect means silence. Freedom means obedience. And if you speak the language long enough, you forget the difference. Let's pause. Creating absolute obedience doesn't require chains. Just the slow dismantling of autonomy. You don't have to force someone to kneel. You just have to convince them that standing was never an option. You think you know where your boundaries are. You think you'd never follow an order that goes against your values, that you'd speak up, that you'd say no, that you'd resist. But history tells another story, and science has tested it again and again. Let's talk about the Milgram experiment. Yale University. Psychologist Stanley Milgram wanted to know, how far would ordinary people go just because someone in a lab coat told them to? Participants believed they were helping with a memory test. They were told to deliver electric shocks to a man in another room every time he gave a wrong answer. With each mistake, the voltage increased. 300 volts, 350, 400. The man screamed, banged on the wall, begged to stop. Eventually, he went silent. And still, the participants continued because the experimenter said, "Please continue." The experiment requires that you continue. It is absolutely essential that you continue. Over 65% went all the way. They believed they were killing a man, and they did it anyway. Not out of hatred, not out of sadism, but out of obedience. Let's talk about what this revealed. The presence of authority is enough to override morality. Even in people who consider themselves good, kind, normal, when responsibility is transferred, I was just following orders. The conscience shuts down. This wasn't a one-time fluke. The experiment has been replicated in multiple countries across decades with similar results. Let's talk about the Stanford prison experiment. Psychologist Philip Zimbardo created a simulated prison in a university basement. Participants were randomly assigned as guards or prisoners. The guards were given uniforms, sunglasses, and rules. No violence was allowed, only authority. But within hours, the experiment began to spiral. Guards became cruel, invented punishments, humiliated prisoners, deprived them of sleep, forced them into degrading positions. And the prisoners, they broke down, cried, became passive. Some begged to leave. Others accepted the abuse. The entire simulation had to be shut down in less than a week. Zimbardo didn't just study the loss of freedom. He facilitated it. And what did it show? That roles are more powerful than personality. That structure can override empathy. That when people believe the situation is real enough, they obey. Let's talk about normal people becoming monsters. You see it in history. The guards at Auschwitz, the bureaucrats of Stalin's purges, the Khmer Rouge's child soldiers, American soldiers at Abu Ghraib, the neighbors who reported Jews during the Holocaust, the parents who excommunicate their children from cults. These weren't cartoon villains. They were teachers, mothers, teenagers, clerks. So how did they cross the line? They didn't. The line moved. Slowly, incrementally, with each small act of obedience, each excuse, each justification. Let's talk about moral disengagement. Once you believe you're not responsible, you can do almost anything. Harm becomes procedure. Pain becomes protocol. Silence becomes policy. And before you realize what's happened, you're standing in a uniform, handing out orders, watching someone suffer, and thinking, I'm not the bad guy. I'm just doing my job. Let's pause. Obedience isn't about weakness. It's about context. If the system is strong enough, if the authority is trusted enough, if the environment is controlled enough, even you can be made to obey the unthinkable. Obedience isn't complete. When you follow orders, it's complete. When you stop realizing there were orders at all, that's the final stage. The moment when control becomes invisible, when the voice that once belonged to the system now speaks from inside your own skull. Let's talk about internalized authority. At first, you resist. You question. You feel fear. You feel the pressure. But if the conditioning is deep enough, you stop feeling anything at all. You wake up and behave as expected. Not because someone tells you to, but because you've absorbed the rules. This is how obedience becomes identity. You say, I'm just not confrontational. I like to follow structure. I don't want to cause trouble. I'm just keeping the peace. But beneath those phrases is something else. A mind that's been trained to suppress dissent. Let's talk about how this training works. It begins with rewards. You comply, you're praised, you're seen, you're valued. Then come the punishments. You resist, you're isolated, embarrassed, rejected, punished. So you learn. Discomfort means danger. Silence means safety. Doubt means guilt. And eventually, you don't need the punishment anymore. You do it to yourself. You edit your words. You censor your thoughts. You become your own prison guard. Let's talk about learned self-policing. Authoritarianism doesn't always need enforcers. It just needs repetition. If you hear something often enough, you start to believe it's yours. You're lazy. You're weak. You're selfish for questioning. You're lucky to be here. You're not smart enough to decide. These thoughts don't enter like invaders. They disguise themselves as your own voice. And once they're inside, you don't resist them. You follow them because you think they're you. Let's talk about obedience in modern life. It's not just in regimes or cults, it's in corporate meetings, in classrooms, in families, in relationships, anywhere where silence is rewarded, where questioning is punished, where pleasing others becomes a survival strategy. People show up every day to lives they didn't choose, to jobs they hate, to roles that suffocate them. And they say, I chose this. But did they? Or were they trained to want what was expected? Let's talk about the illusion of freedom. True control doesn't chain the body. It conditions the mind. It replaces curiosity with compliance, doubt with guilt, authenticity with performance. And worst of all, it convinces you that your obedience is proof of your goodness, that staying silent is noble, that never questioning is mature, that saying yes over and over makes you strong. But the truth is darker. Sometimes obedience isn't strength. Sometimes it's the echo of a voice you don't remember learning to fear. Let's pause. The perfect obedience isn't loud. It doesn't march or salute. It sits quietly in a chair, smiling, composed, dead inside, and when asked what it wants, it says, whatever you think is best. Let's close with this. Freedom isn't breaking chains. It's recognizing you're in them. It's hearing the voice in your head and asking, is this me? Or is this someone I was trained to become? The obedient don't always look broken. They often look just like you. And sometimes they are.